I was going to find that gun and I was going to either kill them or they were going to kill me. I was born to a 13-year-old little girl. I endured beating after beating after beating. Extension cords were her weapon of choice. She would beat me profusely to the point to where my skin would be black, blue, and purple. And I was getting a little bit older and I was just like, I can't take this anymore. One night, my mother was beat so bad by her then husband that I think that night something finally clicked in her head. And she actually tried to fight back. She pulled out a gun and she tried to shoot him with it, but he pulled the gun from her hands and he beat her with it and threw the gun away. Why is my mother so weak? Why is she allowing this man to beat her? And many times I asked a cousin, an aunt, and uncle who my father was. Nobody would ever answer me. And then another memory fell. This friend one day says to me, "That's why you and your mother have the same father." My mother went to visit her father over the summer of 1978. And when she came home, she was pregnant with me. She had no idea that her father was a So I've been the family secret all this time. Everybody's whispering behind my back. Nobody's telling me the truth. The morning after the beating, my brother and I were arguing because he wanted me to iron him a different pair of clothes, and he was at the bathroom door yelling at me. My mother's husband heard the argument. He went to my mother yelling at her, and she came into the bathroom with that extension cord, and she gave me a beating that was by far the worst beating that I had ever received. I was bruised all over, welts were forming up on my body. But the emotion that I felt as I was running out of that house to get on the school bus was different from any emotion I'd ever felt after a beating. Everybody got picked up in front of their house. And as I'm on this school bus in searing pain, and I had it made up in my mind that if I went back to that house, I was going to find that gun and I was going to either kill them or they were going to kill me. I got into my first hour class, my geometry class, with Mrs. Burnside, a white teacher. But I built a rapport with Mrs. Burnside and Mrs. McGraw, the other white teacher. Out of all the teachers in the building, they were the only two that I actually trusted with my truth. Because my mother's husband was a major dealer. His entire family were major dealers, and everybody knew it. So the black community, even in Michigan and Mississippi, were terrified of this man. But I knew that if I was able to just share my truth with Mrs. Burnside, that something would happen. So I wrote her a letter, and after class, I stuck the letter under her book and I walked out and went to my next class. And within minutes, she was at the door with tears in her eyes talking to Mrs. McGraw. And they called me and they said, "We're taking you to the office." CPS was called. They just asked if they could look at my body. And I said yes. And I'm standing with my back turned to them as they're looking at my body and they're taking pictures. And even now, 30 plus years later, I can still hear the sniffles and the tears and the cries and the way that they were trying to muffle the sounds of their cries from looking at my body. I ended up in foster care that day. My first foster home, they had good hearts, but they were definitely a family that no foster child should ever be with. Because one of the daughters, her boyfriend, was a major. I just left a major and now I'm in a foster home with a daughter whose boyfriend is a major. And while they were all nice, the children and her boyfriend were all nice to me, I still had to experience the domestic violence between the two of them. I woke up one morning getting ready for school and I could hear my foster mother on the phone screaming and yelling into the phone. And I hear her say, "I'm sick and tired of my check coming late. Y'all keep sending me my check late. I don't work for free. Y'all can have this girl back." And her daughter came upstairs and she said, "Take this trash bag and put your stuff in a trash bag." 7:30 in the morning before DHS evens open up. And in Mississippi where we were, the caseworkers, their offices were in double wide trailers. A porch attached to this double wide trailer. My foster sister pulled up to that porch, told me to sit on the porch and wait for the foster worker to show up. So at 7:30 in the morning, I'm around 14 or 15 years old with my belongings in a trash bag. In the dark, pretty much, because the sun hadn't even quite come up good, waiting for my social worker to show up. So my foster care worker, she comes, lets me into her office, and she's upset, scrambling because clearly she wasn't expecting me. They did end up finding me another foster home that day, thank God. I didn't have to go into a group home. I went into my second foster home, which started out being a really, really, really good foster home. My new caseworker had become fond of me. She had realized that I was extremely intelligent, that I was extremely vocal, and that I would make a great speaker. I didn't know until she brought it to my attention that the Kellogg Foundation had sponsored a group of foster teens in the state of Mississippi that had just formed. The team was called the Speak Up Now team, and they were recruiting foster youth. Not only had I been prepared to tell my story, but in sitting in these meetings with other foster teens, listening to their stories, my story didn't seem so bad. They put us in front of a crowd. We spoke. I spent my 16th birthday speaking in front of a large crowd, and I will never forget, as I was telling my story, looking dead in the face of my first foster worker who put me in the home of the foster family that I was in first, that I had no business being in. And I remember saying, it does not matter if your shift ends at 5 o'clock. If you don't have suitable placement for a child to go into, you either work over to make sure we are in suitable homes, or you give us to your supervisor or someone else who can ensure that we are in safe homes. Because I should not have had to suffer. I should not have had to deal with being discarded like I was trash because my social worker just wanted to get home at 5 o'clock. So it was okay with her to just place me in the first foster family that would say yes. And as I was standing there looking at her, something erupted in me inside. And this power came over me like, this is where your freedom is. This is where you are going to find your voice. And I thought, okay, I can do this. Before I ended up in foster care, I'd actually attempted suicide. I had to be between 13 and 14 years old. It was one of the nights where my mother had left me with her children yet again. And I planned this suicide attempt. Entire bottle of Tylenol. Swallowed them. Got probably 75% of the bottle down. And something came over me, and I now know that it was the Holy Spirit. And it forced the pills back up. And I lay there in that bathroom, vomiting profusely, vomiting violently. I now know that it was without a shadow of a doubt the voice of God at this point. And he was saying to me, Lakeisha, I just need you to trust me. If you trust me, I will use you. I will use your voice one day. But you have to trust me. And I just began to cry because I'm now understanding that the God that I have been cursing out, the God that I have been yelling at, the God that I have been refusing to believe. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to trust you. I don't want to deal with this. But he wouldn't let me die. Those pills should have killed me, but they had no effect on me. God took me back. And before he left me, he said to me, every time you refuse to forgive your mother, it's not your mother that you know that you refuse to forgive. It's that 13-year-old little girl. I was 16 years old when I forgave my mother for everything that she had done to me. And even now, at 44 years old, we have never had a healthy relationship because she is stuck in her trauma. And months later, the Speak Up Now team, the SUN team that I was a part of, we were successful. In 1996, the state of Mississippi modified their termination of parental rights bill. I was in my junior year of high school when my foster family started to decline. My foster parents were having marital issues. Their daughter was constantly stealing from me. She was quite jealous of me. And my foster father had made some comments to me that were inappropriate to the point to where I didn't want to be in the house with him alone anymore. And so I called my grandmother and I said, they're going to send me to a group home unless you come and get me. They came to get me. My grandmother became my saving grace. The church that I was at with my cousins, I knew that it was cult-like. I knew that I didn't want any parts of it. But I can never deny the fact that the prophet of that house, who is indeed a prophet, definitely heard from God. And I had been going to this church for quite a while. And the members of this church, the leaders, none of them ever really paid me any attention. But this man called me up from the back of the church one day and he said, you, come here. And I'm looking around going, who was he talking to? Because he never talked to me before. And he said, yes, you, come here. And so I got up and I went to the front of the church and I stood before him and he looked at me and all he said was, God said, you are about to make a decision that is going to change the rest of your life. Don't do it. And I thought, and if I had known that, I would have actually listened. But at almost 18 years old, I should have listened. I knew what I was planning to do. I was planning to have my fiance come and get me and take me back to Mississippi. That's what I should not have done. But I did it. I went back to Mississippi, ended up breaking up with my boyfriend and ended up connecting with a childhood classmate from Mississippi. We connected when he came off from the military and ended up hooking up I moved back to Michigan in the midst of us hooking up. And we kind of separated our ways because he was in the military anyway. Even though I had come back to Michigan, that hookup would lead to an 18-year detour in my life. And I ended up getting pregnant. I spent my daughter's first 18 years of her life healing from traumas, running from other traumas, focused on being the best mother that I could be to her, not focused on Lakeisha at all. God was on a shelf. I had not been in church from that point up until the time that my daughter was about 5 years old, when I had an encounter with God, laying in bed with my daughter asleep. And I got woken up, and it felt like I had a 1,000-pound weight on my chest. I could not move. I could not scream for my daughter. I could not move. All I could do was lay there. And with tears rolling down my eyes, I thought that I was going to die with my daughter laying in the bed next to me. My relationship with God at this point, it's solid. I'm talking to him. He's talking to me. He knows that I don't care for his people, i.e. his children, which is why I hadn't been in a church. But my relationship with him was solid. And I heard him distinctly in the midst of me crying inside and tears falling down my face, saying to me, Lakeisha, do I have your attention? And I'm thinking to myself, yes, God. And he says to me, Tabernacle of David. And I'm thinking to myself, yes, okay, yes, Tabernacle of David. Please get this weight off of my chest. Please get this weight off of my chest. Please relieve me from this pain. The weight lifted off of me. I was able to get up and I was able to run downstairs 2-3 o'clock in the morning, go to my computer and type in Tabernacle of David because I never heard of this Tabernacle of David. And once I looked it up and the church came up, I thought, I've been in that church, but that's Pentecostal outreach. And I'm looking at the computer going, they must have had a name change because now it's Tabernacle of David and this is where God wants me to go. Mother's Day weekend is when this happened. Mother's Day weekend, 2007. I got up on Mother's Day, got my daughter dressed. I said, we're going to church. But I walked into this church just knowing that I was supposed to be there and sat down ready to figure out why God was sending me there. The pastor over the church, she was ministering the word in a way that I had never heard the word ministered before. She ministered the word in a way that resonated with me because it felt like she was definitely one who was truly hearing from God. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm supposed to be here. This is the ministry that I'm supposed to be a part of. I stayed in that church for approximately 8-9 years. All of that stuff was a distraction to keep me from who I am today. But even in the midst of the distractions, God was from an early age developing my voice. So yes, while I was living in trauma and while I was being adversely affected by what was going on around me and while I was yet unhealed and while I was imperfect, God was doing the very thing that he told me to do when I was a little girl and he stopped me from committing suicide. If you trust me, one day I will use your voice. And so today at 44 years old, my trust in God has yielded me to a position to where he can now use me as truly as his prophet and as a seer of God. But it hasn't been easy. Even now there are still traumas. Even now there are still things that I struggle with. But what separates me from those who are so immersed in their trauma and so immersed in their unforgiveness and so immersed in the pain of the past that they can't function is I was able to forgive and I was able to understand the necessity and the importance of forgiveness. I would not be where I am today if God had not impressed upon me when I was 16 years old why it was vital for me to forgive back then and why I carry the throne of forgiveness around. Unforgiveness would have kept me chained to the trauma. It would have kept me chained to the trauma of the past. It would have kept me bound. It would have kept me unusable to God. I now recognize my traumas. I now recognize my triggers. I now have the power, thanks to God, to control them before they overtake me. I am not defined by what I come from. I am not defined by anything that happened to me. I am not defined by my conception. I am not defined by the natural DNA in my blood. I am defined by my resilience and my faith in God. I am defined by my ability to say, yes, this happened to me, but it also is evidence of the mantle that God has called me to. It is also what God has used. He's taken pain and turned it into purpose. God has a purpose and a plan for it all. What the enemy means for evil, God will indeed use it for his good, just as he is using me. No matter what is going on in and around and through you, God chooses you daily, but he wants you to choose him. He wants you to trust him. I am living, breathing evidence of what it means to truly trust God. I spent so many years of my childhood seeking a natural father, not realizing that I would never have one. But what I found instead was God, who has been my father my entire life, even before I was born. For those of you who are foster teens currently in the foster care system, for those of you who are not in the foster care system, I implore you to speak up and to speak out. If you have felt like you haven't had anybody to talk to, or nobody will believe you, or nobody will listen to you, I am here to tell you that that is a trick of the enemy to keep you bound and to keep you stuck dealing with that trauma in your head. The battlefield of the mind where those thoughts rage is a battlefield where you will not win. Speak up, speak out. Contact me. If I can't help you, I will connect you with somebody who can help you. But the reason why so many of us, as adults especially, walk around unsuccessful, walk around angry and ending up in prison or ending up on or some other device that we use to medicate our pain, is because we don't speak up and we don't talk. It's because we don't find a proper outlet to communicate our struggles. Talking, communicating in any mechanism, even writing, is what has helped me. I started out writing poetry when I didn't have anybody to talk to. Those poems are now being used to minister to other survivors. If you have been a victim, I promise you, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of what it feels like, you are not alone. Speak your truth so that you can heal from it and so that you can unlink yourself to it, unchain yourself from it, but not just for you. So many people, even with me telling my story here now, are healing and are learning to detach themselves from their own trauma and their own pain because me and so many others like me have decided to stand in our truth and to speak that which we are called to speak on. I promise you, somebody is waiting to hear your story. I'm only one person. My story will only reach a certain amount of people. Your story will reach others. Your story will help others heal. So I promise you, if you start talking, if you start sharing, you will start to realize that you are not alone. Don't let the enemy keep you bound. We are more together than we are alone.